Hey, what's going on, Giants fans? Welcome to the latest episode of our Talk is Cheap podcast. Daryl Slater here with Bob Brookover, NJ Advanced Media, the Star Ledger, NJ.com. As always, well, we promised you guys we would be back here this week doing a podcast, and we didn't promise what the topic would be, but the topic, of course, is as we're recording this on Tuesday morning, the Giants Sunday afternoon go up to Minnesota, win 31-24 in the wild card round. Raucous environment, insanely loud stadium, and on they go. They're one of the final four teams in the NFC. So it'll be Giants at Eagles on Saturday night in Philadelphia. It'll be a fascinating, fun, game and a very challenging road setting for the Giants. And of course, on Sunday, Cowboys at 49ers. So quite an NFC East renaissance here. And, look, big picture, all you guys and gals know it. What's the Giants are up against, history-wise in terms of recent history, having lost 48-22 to the Eagles, the top-seeded team, well-rested in the NFC. And not only that, I mean, the Giants in their last 30 games against the Eagles are, including the playoffs, and there's only one playoff game in there, are 6-24, which, I mean, wow, since capping off a 3-game winning streak against the Eagles during in the first meeting of 2008 when the Giants were coming off that Super Bowl, the Giants then went 6-24. That includes, of course, the 08 playoffs when the Giants were the 1 seed. They got the bye. The Eagles were the 6 seed. Really, obviously, the flip of what's going on now. And the Giants lose in the divisional round in that game in 08. This will be the 4th time these teams have met in the playoffs. 81 wild card game the Giants won. The 2000 divisional game that the Giants won on their way to losing to the Ravens in the Super Bowl. And then the 06 wild card game that the Giants
and then 07 or 08 too. So it's 4th time. This will be the 5th time.
Sorry, yeah, there have been 4 times. Exactly right, Bob. So we welcome you in on that, and a lot to unpack. So much history, so much bad blood, and that's what'll make it a great game or entertaining.
I was at 3 of those 4 games you just mentioned. So
Were you at 81?
What's that?
Were you at the 81 game?
I would. That's the one I was at. I was at that one as a fan.
Oh wow!
In beautiful Veteran Stadium. The Eagles that year had started like 6-0 coming off a Super Bowl, and everybody thought they were going to win a Super Bowl, and kind of just fell apart. And the Giants took control of that playoff game early to win. That was an upset win for sure. And then I wasn't at the 2000 game. I was still covering baseball at that point. And then I was at the other 2. And it's funny because you mentioned this is kind of the opposite, and is doing a story on the history of the rivalry today. It made me think, you know what? Reminds me so much of the year the Eagles went into. They closed down the Meadowlands. They closed down Giants Stadium by beating a Giants team that was probably the best team in the NFL that year. They had won the Super Bowl the year before, and they were a much better team in the regular season that year than they had been the previous year. But they were leaking oil a little bit. The Eagles had beaten them in the last regular season game. That they not the very last regular season game, but the last time they met the second time they met in the regular season, the Eagles had beaten them and grew some confidence from that. And then they beat them again a few weeks later, and it was a stunning loss for the Giants. And it just feels like the Giants are that team that the Eagles were back then, right now, and the Eagles are leaking the oil a little bit too going into this game. It didn't finish the season really the way they had played it most of the season.
Yeah, no doubt, and that's what makes this game, I think, pretty compelling. Even though the line is 7.5, the Giants, meanwhile, are playing their best ball of the season. Of course, even most especially Daniel Jones, who was outstanding in Minnesota. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a tough challenge for this Giants team. It's a short week. They're having to come off the road and now go back on the road. Granted, Philly is not that far, but come off a tough road game. Got home late Sunday night. They'll be back on the practice field later today because it is a Saturday night game. So not the usual schedule. A bit of a shorter week. So physically challenging for the Giants, and certainly schematically and talent wise, beating this Eagles team is going to be no easy task. But obviously expectations high for the Eagles. And like you said, they fizzled a little bit later in the season. But you really look at you talk about that 08 game, right? And yes, the Giants won the Super Bowl in 11. So it's not like they didn't, it's not like they did nothing from the time that game, from the time of that '08 playoff game that lost to the Eagles in the divisional round. But other than the Super Bowl, and I know that sounds crazy because other than they won the Super Bowl, the Giants had not won a playoff game from that divisional round loss to the Eagles in '08. Again, other than the Super Bowl run, until the win in Minnesota. So, which was their first playoff win in 11 years, first playoff appearance since 16. And this is, it's pretty clear these are the new Giants, this young, unapologetic, fearless group. I guess we'll just start with the obvious in Jones. So if he plays like he did in Minnesota, and we'll get to predictions later, I mean, the Giants have as good of a chance as ever to beat this Eagles team, right, on Saturday.
They absolutely do. The one thing I'd say about that is, especially in the first half, it seemed like the Vikings, it was they acted like Daniel Jones has no running capability whatsoever. They just completely ignored his ability to run, and it's not like that was a secret. I think he's finished third in the NFL and among rushing yards for quarterbacks, so it shouldn't have been a surprise. But it sure looked like a surprise with the way he just had no problems running wherever he wanted to. On top of that, he helped himself and the Giants by being deadly accurate throwing the ball on the run, and throwing the ball out of the pocket. So that made it, certainly difficult to defend. But it might have been the Giants' offensive line's best game of the season. They really played extremely well in this game. But the difference between the Vikings defense and the Eagles defense is huge. The Eagles have people that I got to think that they, after watching that, they're going to have somebody or more than one somebody accounting at all times for where Daniel Jones is going. And, they also have, the Giants like the fact that they had 19 different guys record sacks this year, which is an incredible stat. It was the most in the league. But the Eagles, on the other hand, had four guys record double-digit sacks, and
Wow.
and and then add Fletcher Cox, who his 7 sacks were half less than Dexter Lawrence that led the league. So they almost pretty much had 5 guys who had as many sacks as the Giants leader in sacks. So I mean, they've got a pass rush.
They have that, and they obviously have a couple excellent corners in James Bradbury, the Giants' old pal, and Darius Slay, and so that will be. And James Bradbury's played really well this year. I mean, last year with the Giants, Adoree Jackson was, and we'll get to the performance of Adoree Jackson in Minnesota, but Adoree Jackson was better than James Bradbury last year. So you look at it, they had to cut James Bradbury for cap reasons, and you kind of look at it objectively and thought, okay, it's not ideal that they're having to cut him, but Adoree Jackson could hold his own certainly as a number one corner, and he has when healthy. But Bradbury this year, man, he's 6 in PFF, Pro Football Focus's coverage rating, number 6. Sauce Gardner, number 1, by the way, from the Jets by far. But Bradbury, number 6, ahead of Patrick Peterson from the Vikings, who had a solid year, but obviously the Vikings did not play well defensively in that game. They gave up chunk yardage to Isaiah Hodgins, to Darius Slayton. Saquon Barkley wound up getting his at the end of the game as the Giants were able to pull ahead on his 2-yard touchdown run there with 7:47 left. So they go ahead and win another game in the fourth quarter, which, my gosh, I mean, that's become this team's specialty. Not a comeback win, but they were able to get that, pull it out there at the end, obviously. And yeah, I guess so the storyline going in, obviously was going to be Daniel Jones, but they held Justin Jefferson to like nothing. I mean, remarkable. If I told you that he was going to have 1 catch in the second half, I mean, you probably thought it would be insane.
I mean, he had what was it, 3 for 16 yards after the first series, because it looked like after that first series they were going to light him up all day.
Yeah.
And then Adoree Jackson just did the job that Xavier McKinney thought he could do.
The Giants backed it up. I mean, they backed it up. They really did. And Kayvon Thibodeau doing the gritty dance celebration that Justin Jefferson does on the field after knocking him out of the playoffs. And the Giants certainly earned the right to boast a little bit. And now they have to go. So to me, like, do you think that kind of sent a little bit of a message to maybe Devontae Smith and AJ Brown? Hey, look out! The Giants can actually cover people when they have all their pieces in that secondary.
I do, but the thing the Eagles have that the Vikings don't is two of them.
Yep,
They got Smith and and
Brown.
AJ Brown,
Yeah.
and they also have some deep threats too, and Quez Watkins. So you got to be careful there. Um, and I think T.J. Hawkinson is better than Dallas Goedert, although they're similar. And I'm not sure how healthy Dallas Goedert is. He was out for a while earlier this season and has only returned recently. But certainly the Eagles have more weapons than the Vikings did.
100%. And then the Giants know that from having gotten just roasted and toasted in December. But, it's worth remembering no Leonard Williams in that game for pass rush pressure. No Adoree Jackson. He had the sprained knee from November
No
20th.
Xavier McKinney.
No Xavier McKinney. So how much of a difference do you think that'll make?
It should. I mean, we just saw it can make a difference against the Vikings, and it did. So yeah, it can. It can. I mean, the Giants are not that team that got crushed by the Eagles. It was their worst game of the season by far. They are not that team, and this is not going to be that game. This is going to be a tough, close game, like the Giants always play. And they can win it if they play their best football. They definitely can. They got to contain Hurts in terms of getting out of the pocket and hurting them with his legs, which he did in that first game. And they have to do a tight job on the receivers, and most of all, they have to play a clean game. That was probably the biggest thing that they did against the Vikings. The first time they played, had two huge turnovers and a block punt. In this game, they played a completely clean game, and they came out on top.
Yeah, I mean that's why I was a bit surprised to see the line at 7.5 there. It seems a little high. But
Yeah, but I think if you factor in the home field, they're saying they're 4.5 points better. Yeah, that sounds about right. I think.
yeah, and we're kind of jumping all over between offense and defense, but just these thoughts coming to me about how the Giants can win this game, and certainly being able to slow down Devontae Smith and slow down AJ Brown a little bit more than they did in the first game, and just like Adoree Jackson was able to do against Justin Jefferson, that will be a big part. The Daniel Jones factor, no doubt. The Giants put up 431 yards in Minnesota, their third most of the year. If you look at that Eagles game that they lost 48-22, and they didn't really do anything well, they put up 304. It's just hard to imagine them winning if they're not moving the ball to at least somewhere on the upper end of that spectrum, closer to the 400. And being able to get quick strike touchdown drives. I mean, they had an 81-yard touchdown drive in Minnesota that took 203. They had a 75-yard one that took 312. Obviously, they had that weird long field goal drive too, and they had a 75-yard one that took 323. So they had three pretty quick strike touchdown drives in that game. They were able to move the ball at a really nice clip, and I think that'll be hugely important if they can strike early and take the Eagles crowd out of it a little bit, like they were able to do in Minnesota. The Giants were up 17-7 until 45 seconds were left in the second quarter of that game in Minnesota. I mean, I will say that's the loudest NFL stadium. I've never been to Seattle. That would be the only other one, right? That would probably match up.
Right.
I've always, on a whole,
Kansas City is always up there.
Kansas City, yeah, yeah. I've never covered a good team going to Kansas City, but man, that was so loud. But the Giants handled it, and I was
They,
really impressed with that.
they did it very well. I mean, there was no false starts. They did have an illegal shift, but that's not necessarily a noise problem. Um, but it was. I think it was the best game the Giants played all year. It really was. They just played clean football. Certainly the best game Daniel Jones has played the best game of his life and the biggest game of his life 2 of the last 3 weeks. He played great against the Colts and then played even better against the Vikings.
Against a much better opponent, and
Right.
I mean, very clearly he's earned himself a contract. You wrote it immediately after the game. Um, he's going to make a lot of money this offseason, isn't he?
Oh yes, I think that game might have put him. I mean, they might opt to wrap him up for 5 years, and if they did, it's going to be a 9-figure contract. and um, and I don't think the Maras or Tisches will have any problem doing it if that's the route they decide to go. That's just how good he's looked. I mean, this is my first year covering this team, and just from the outside looking in, I would be like a lot of people, and probably a lot of people who were covering the team. Just wondering, can the Giants win with this guy? And now you look at him and say, how could they possibly let him go? How could you can't even imagine not trying to win without this guy.
How could they win without him? Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, he wasn't just a part. He wasn't just a player on the field in a game that they won. He was, he was the one of the biggest, perhaps the biggest reason they won the game. I mean, 24-35, 301, 2 touchdowns, a 114.1 quarterback rating, 78 rushing yards. He carried the ball 17 times. Um, like you said, obviously the biggest game of his career in his playoff debut, and he played the best game of his career. And you look at where that game ranks quarterback rating wise. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's had 6 regular season games with a higher quarterback rating than that. So certainly, one of the best games of his career, just even numerically. And you look at what they could wind up paying him on the franchise tag. If they use it as a placeholder, it becomes the baseline for negotiations. So
Right.
that's
And the funny thing is, you said 6 in his career, 3 of them have come this year.
yep. Yeah. I'm looking at that. I actually didn't look at that part of it, but yeah, his number 3. So the number 1 would be the Houston game rating quarterback wise. Number 3 would be the Indianapolis game. And then number 6 would be, well, the old number 6, the new number 7 was the season opener in Tennessee. So 4 of the top 7 now in terms of quarterback rating for him this year, as he's really shown the Giants that, he can be the reason why they win. Not just they're winning in spite of him, but he can be the reason why they win. And so that franchise tag, looking at about $32.4 million. The transition tag is 30.4. The bottom line is, like, the franchise tag is like you lock a guy up, no doubt. The transition tag, you probably lock him up. It's just a lot to explain, but it's a little looser. Like, to me, just franchise tag him. It's a difference of $2 million. And then that becomes the baseline for negotiations. And then they'll have until mid-July to lock up, to get a contract done. I would be surprised, honestly. I think we've talked about this. If Daniel Jones says, no, I'm just going to play out the year on the franchise tag, right? I mean, because I guess he has confidence in himself, but there's always a possibility for a player who had like one good year that's been kind of an outlier like this
Right.
to perhaps revert back.
I would be surprised too, and for an entirely different reason. I would just be surprised because, as little as Daniel Jones says, and as much as he keeps things close to the vest, if you just look at that guy, he is one happy human being right now. He is just comfortable in his own skin and comfortable in that locker room. Um, he might not ever say much, but he's always in that room, in the locker room. It's not like he tries to go and hide somewhere. He sits in his locker for long periods of time when the locker room's open. Uh, you know, enjoys talking to his teammates. Um, you know, he enjoys talking to Saquon. You can see they have a special relationship. I just think he loves it. He loves it here. So that would be why I'd be surprised.
And I think probably quarterback of any position too is really coach dependent, or perhaps to phrase it another way, like the coach can really have a big impact on the guy's production, because we saw. I mean, yeah, I'm sure there have been like physical and technique improvements that Daniel Jones has made this year, but this is a great marriage for him with Brian Dable in this offense, Mike Kafka, but really Brian Dable's scheme. Um,
Yep, absolutely.
there's no telling if he happens to chase a little more money elsewhere, or something like that, if it's going to work out for him with another coach, because we've seen, in certain coaching situations that it hasn't.
Sure, it's a great thing to look at in a draft. Like, okay, 5 quarterbacks are taken in the first round, and okay, where did they go? And you often wonder if this guy had gone there instead of there, and this guy had gone there instead of there, and ended up with that coaching staff, would their roles have flipped? Because
Yeah.
The point you just made, that part of developing a quarterback, and whether you fit your quarterback to your scheme or your scheme fits to your quarterback, all that stuff is vital. And it's hard to define, probably impossible to define, but it's like chemistry. It exists. It's just hard to define.
Schematic chemistry, really, and it's not the same for, like, say, a cornerback or a defensive tackle, and like Dexter Lawrence, they should lock him up obviously this offseason, but he can, you could understand, say, all right, go chase the top dollar. Doesn't matter where you go, you're going to be a great player, but not, like we said, not the same for quarterback. And speaking of Mike Kafka and the job he's done as a Giants offensive coordinator. And let's remember this too. Mike Kafka calls the plays. I mean, from day one, Brian Dable, even from his introductory press conference, Brian Dable and Joe Shane said, we would prefer to have the new offensive coordinator call the plays. They hire Mike Kafka away from the Chiefs, an Andy Reid disciple. Never had called plays, ever, at any level. The guy's 35 years old, which, whatever, that doesn't matter per se. But, and now he's sitting here having done this job with Daniel Jones and this offense. And granted, they're not a high-powered offense, but we've covered over and over, they're an opportunistic offense. And the bottom line is they're in the divisional round of the playoffs. They're in the Final Four in the NFC. He has head coaching interest from the Colts, the Texans, and the Panthers. Now, he'll be interviewing next week, right? Because Brian Dable said yesterday the schedule is just too tight this week.
Right. Yeah.
Which makes sense. And so if you look at the teams that need head coaches, and I was so Colts, Panthers, Texans, Broncos, and Cardinals, unless I'm missing someone, those 5 teams need head coaches. So he has interest from 3 of them. Colts, not just interest, interview requests from the Colts, the Texans, and the Panthers. I'd be interested to see how this guy would do as a head coach. Do you think ultimately, if you had to guess, will he get? This is his first time in the cycle, as they say.
Right. Right.
Do you think he'll get a job?
I mean, if the Giants' offense plays like this against the Eagles, it's going to only enhance his.
Yep.
There's a couple things. If that happens, also they've already looked and saw that he took Daniel Jones, and everybody else, pretty much had the same opinion about Daniel Jones coming into this season. This is his make or break season, and it's obviously been a make rather than a break. They're all seeing that. Now, obviously, there are other factors that go into hiring a head coach. Do they think he's ready? And it's not just about calling plays. The optimum example of that is Brian Dable. He gave up those play calling things to kind of, this was a term used to me by Bob Lamont, who's the super agent for all the NFL head coaches, including Andy Reid, but he used to tell me head coaches should be CEOs. And that's what Brian Dable has become of the Giants. He's the CEO. He oversees everything. He makes sure everything's running right on game day, on the field. That's what he's become. So, Kafka has to prove to whoever he interviews with that he can be that too. I don't see Mike Kafka giving up the play calling if he became a head coach, but I could be wrong. But the CEO part, just based on the way he's handled interviews with us, I would have some questions about with Mike Kafka, because he doesn't. He's not an open book. Let's put it that way. You don't have to be an open book, but I think that you need to be able to handle a media market, and not just a media market. Obviously, his players like him and what he's done, but you have to be able to run a whole room. And that part I don't know about with Mike Kafka. That would be my question mark.
Run a room is a great way to put it, because the CEO part is a big part of it, and the in-game management is an enormous part of it. 4th down calls, when to punt, all that stuff, clock management. Running a room and managing egos and personalities of a lot of alpha male young guys who can be mercurial at times, can be up and down. There we go. At times. And guys who are at a time, you have guys come from all different backgrounds. And you have to at times get on these guys. You saw Brian Dable do it, but you also have to manage that with the perfect example. He ripped into Jack Anderson. A couple days later, Jack Anderson walks into the Giants facility, and Brian Dable not only sits down and talks to Jack about it and apologizes. Brian Dable volunteered to us. He didn't have to say this. publicly put it out there that he basically apologized for how he handled that situation. So it's managing the emotional state and measuring the emotional state of your team. That's really, really important. And now,
I'll go back to Jeffrey Lurie for a minute. When he fired Chip Kelly, his reason given, and everybody laughed at the time, was he didn't have enough emotional intelligence.
yeah, maturity and right, isn't that the word?
Right. It was like at the time, we're like, what? Huh? And Chip had rubbed so many people the wrong way, including his players, but also including his boss, the owner. And it's so vital. And we hear Brian Dable say it all the time. This is a people business. You have to be able to deal with it, and he's right. It is.
Not a lot of coaches can be jerks like Bill Belichick and still thrive. And not to say Mike Kafka would be in that Chip Kelly, Bill
Right.
Belichick.
Right. No, he
I
was
don't.
not.
I think if anything,
He's
he'd
not.
be
He just is. He seems reserved. Is the word.
yes.
Say more than he's definitely not a jerk.
No, no, and the thing about to remember about Brian Dable, rookie head coach, Brian Dable's 47 years old, and he's been around. He has won big in big settings as an offensive coordinator, in college, in the NFL, 5 Super Bowl rings, a college national championship, worked under Belichick and Saban. Obviously, not only is Mike Kafka much younger, he has much less experience. So maybe not this offseason for Mike Kafka. But eventually, it'll be fascinating to see that if and when he does get a shot, how will he manage all those things? And that he's seen Brian Dable do so well this year, manage the emotional state of the team, work with guys, be able to talk with guys, and I think giving up play calling would be important. I think it's really important for a rookie head coach to, if anybody, to be that CEO, because maybe a veteran guy can get away, maybe or even thrive, right? Like Andy Reid, right? He still calls plays, right?
Yeah, he's vacillated back and forth between doing it and not doing it over the
Sure.
years.
But he could certainly do it and
Yeah,
still, and they have the talent too. But yeah, no, I think that'll be. It's interesting to hear you say that you don't think he'd give it up. Um, it perhaps might be a moot point. Maybe this isn't his off season. You see guys go through a couple off seasons, right? Brian Dable didn't get it his first time, and shoot, the Chargers, whose GM Tom Telesco went to high school with Brian Dable. Perhaps I don't think at the exact same time. Maybe they went to high school together in Buffalo at the same time. Um, I think Tom's 3 years older than him, but they had a connection, and they still wound up hiring Brandon Staley instead of Dable, and then Dable, of course, gets the Giants job. I think the next offseason. So
right.
sometimes it takes a little bit of time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, they want to see your body of work. And it shouldn't have, let's put it this way. It shouldn't have taken Brian Dable as long as it did. It
Right.
definitely, it definitely should not have. But he got um, caught in that thing with the Patriots, having success with the Patriots, but he wasn't going to move up to a different level there. So, he had to go 2 different times. He had to go to different places to become the OC. And because it's very rare for teams to hire somebody other than an offensive coordinator or defense coordinator, or in the rare occasion, a special teams guy. So, you know,
Yeah, so I'd heard, it's interesting, the old pal Brian Flores from last offseason's lawsuit and all that. I saw Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk mention that he could be the guy with the Cardinals, who have now hired Monty Ossenfort, the old Patriots personnel guy, as their GM. So maybe if Flores goes there, that would leave 4 openings. Jim Harbaugh is staying at Michigan. So Colts, Panthers, Texans, Broncos. Man, the Texans are toxic just perpetually. But the Colts are notable because Wink Martindale also has a request there. We've gotten so far into talking head coaching stuff and the job that these coordinators have done, and Wink Martindale's performance obviously shouldn't be overlooked. He's had so much interest in recent years; it just hasn't happened for him. Um, I think he'd be, I've seen plenty. We've seen plenty from him over the years, and this year, I think he'd do just fine as a head coach, or at least, at the very least, you couldn't sit there and say, "Whoa, what kind of hire is that?" I don't think anyone would be going out on a limb. The Colts wouldn't be going out on a limb hiring him, right?
absolutely not. I think he'd be a terrific head coach. I really do. I think I'd be shocked if Drew Wilkins wasn't his defensive coordinator, for one thing. And who's, for people who don't know, he's the Giants' outside linebackers coach, but also the guy who is behind many of wing split schemes. Um, you know, and I think Wink would be comfortable with Drew Wilkins calling the plays and becoming the CEO, as we've talked about. And I think he would be terrific at running a room. I really do. I think all of those things. The key for a team with Wink Martindale as their head coach is, who does Wink hire as the offensive coordinator? And does he hire the right person? I mean, we haven't really talked about this much on this podcast this year, but one of the brilliant things that Brian Daboll has done is putting this staff together, the right guys. It's a tremendous mix of people who have had success in different places, and they've brought it all together, and it's become a terrific melting pot of NFL coaching ideas.
It has been a great staff, and Wink Martindale. When you're an offensive minded head coach, the DC matters. When you're a defensive minded head coach, of course, your OC matters, and so that was always going to be a huge hire. And Wink Martindale's been around for a long time. He turned 60 in May, so it would be kind of cool to see him get a head coaching opportunity. He's been open about wanting it. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
When you hit 60, I've heard that's when you reach your prime.
Yeah, Wink's got a year on you or two or something like that. But
he's got about 2 months on me.
oh, okay. So he's done a great job this year, and things did not end great for him in Baltimore, but clearly he still has it. Again, a defense that, just like the Giants' offense, not great like overall ratings wise, but really good in the red zone. Both of those, the Giants' offense and defense, very opportunistic, and so it'll be interesting to see if the Giants can parlay, or if this can be parlayed into this run into head coaching opportunities for these guys who have done such a nice job. And when you're a rookie head coach, composing your staff is tremendously important. And as you said, Brian Daboll did a really nice job bringing these guys in, making these hires, and we'll see how it all shakes out. This is a little bit different January. We're not talking about who the Giants are interested in. We're talking about maybe people taking their coordinators.
That would be also a big loss for the Giants if either one of those guys leaves, because Kafka's strength is I had questions about his being a CEO, but he's been a terrific play caller.
Oh yeah.
So I mean that's a Brian Daboll would have to find somebody to replace him. So.
Well, and the bottom line is, whether you're successful as a head coach and whether any of these guys will be, quarterback is so important. And we talk so much about Daniel Jones. We can kind of wrap it up for our pick here with addressing the Jalen Hurts situation. Obviously, not that there's a situation per se, but they found a great quarterback. The kid is outstanding. There's no doubt about it. They made the right call. Howie Roseman made the right move there with moving on from Carson Wentz, rolling with Jalen Hurts. Everyone said when they picked Jalen Hurts, what the heck are you doing? You have Carson Wentz. Well, so much for that.
His quote was, "We want to become a quarterback factory." I believe something along those lines.
I mean, factory indicates, and Jimmy Kempski down there, who does a funny job of doing those stick figure animations, had a great one for that. But factory indicates that you're outputting things. I don't think they want to ship off or export or Jalen Hurts anytime soon. He is their creation, or however you want to put it. But obviously the kid had innate talent, and they've been able to shape and mold it. And but all that said, do you see him in a bit of a lull here, coming off the shoulder injury? Is he maybe not physically vulnerable, but like performance wise, should there be concerns here among Eagles fans right now?
The interesting part is, the last time we saw him was against the Giants. What's that? Against the Giants, against the Giants backups. And he wasn't great by any means in that game. But the question becomes, and I've read a lot of people Eagles coverage after that, and the Eagles didn't really want to say it, but they were very vanilla that day. I mean, it was obvious that they were telling Hurts, we don't want you to run a whole lot. How many times did he run in that game? He ran the ball. I guess he ran it more than I realized. He ran it 9 times for 13 yards. Now I don't know if some of those were scrambles. I don't think he had a whole lot of designed runs, but it was sacked 3 times in that game. Threw an interception, a bad interception, um, to Dane Belton in the end zone. He did not play well. I mean, there's no doubt about it that he did not play well in that game. He hadn't played great in the game that he got hurt in against the Bears either. So he's not going into the postseason on a high note by any means. What was he against the Bears? He was 22 for 37, 315 yards and 2 interceptions in that game. So in his last two starts, he had a 64.6 and a 65.1 rating, no touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Yeah, and compare that to what he had done before with 22 interceptions and 3 picks. So he's not going in on a high note at all. We'll see what the time off did for him in terms of being injured, and in terms of having time to study the Giants. He was certainly terrific against them in the first game, 21 for 31 for 2 touchdowns, and ran 4 times for 33 yards. I suspect they will use his legs a lot in this game too. We will see them try to do what the Giants did to the Vikings with Daniel Jones. I think we will see that in this game. But
Yeah, and you referenced 22
all those things make this game compelling to note for sure.
Very much so. Giants on the uptick. Eagles may be a little vulnerable. So the team's kind of one team rising, one team dropping a little bit. So the gap perhaps closed, certainly more than we saw in 48-22 in December. And you referenced Jalen Hurts, 22 touchdowns, 3 picks in his first 13 games played this season, a 108.4 quarterback rating. So basically double what he had in these last 2 games, just shy of double. And so we'll close it out here with our picks. And we talked in circles around and around about how we see all the factors in this game. Trying to distill it here. Look, this is a winnable game for the Giants. It is. They're not going to get blown out. I just, I have a hard time seeing how they're going to move the ball consistently against this Eagles defense, which is much better. I don't necessarily think the Giants defense is going to be a problem here. I think they'll perform much better against Smith and Brown and Hurts. But being able to score 30, 35, 31, they got to 31 in Minnesota. Not this week. I think Eagles 35, Giants 28. I could see the Giants winning this game, but I got to make a pick. Eagles 35, Giants 28. Then again, for the record, I picked against the Giants last week. I was the only one in our NJ.com picks group to pick against the Giants. All you guys were right. I was wrong. So there you go. Maybe I'm going to be wrong again, but 35-28 Eagles win. How do you see it going?
I'm just going to make this note first. Looking at the history today of this rivalry, it is fascinating. The Eagles had 5 games, I think, where, if you ask Giants fans the worst memories of games against the Eagles, I think you'd say the miracle of the Meadowlands. And then if you're an Eagles fan, you'd respond with which one? There have been like 4 of them. There honestly have been 4 of them. The original one, which Herm Edwards returning a botched handoff, which is why we now have kneel downs instead of teams handing the ball off. That was on November 19th, 1978. 10 years and 1 day later, the Eagles lined up for a game-winning field goal. The Giants blocked it. Clyde Simmons picked it up and ran it in for a blocked field goal, his own blocked field goal for a touchdown. That's 10 years and 1 day after the original miracle at the Meadowlands. And then you had Brian Westbrook. The Eagles were dead in the water, returned a punt that had no business punting him the ball. I believe it was Jeff Fiegels who did it. Punted him the ball. He picked it up on a hop and ran in for a touchdown to save the Eagles season. Both teams were like on the bubble right there, which way their seasons were going to go. Giants went in the tank. Eagles went to the NFC Championship game. Of course, lost it. And then the Deshaun Jackson and the Eagles come from 28 points down, and Deshaun Jackson on the final play, returns a punt for a touchdown. All those great moments are Eagles. They're probably in the top 20 moments of the Eagles' history, but the Giants fans could always rebound with, yeah, but we win championships, which it's like 8-4 in championships, and they've been to 15 other championship games, and the Eagles have been to like 3 other ones. So it's a fascinating rivalry, is my point. Which is apropos of nothing what you're asking me here, I know, but the 20, I got the Eagles winning this game 24-21, but like you, I could very easily see it going the other way. I just think the Eagles' extra time is going to be what gets them over the top here, and they win this 24-21.
Yep, and we didn't even mention Azeez Ojulari with a quad injury. It's just a bruise, so we'll see. He's had an injury-plagued year. He's an important pass rusher for the Giants, and you just reminded me of that by talking about the rest factor and the grind factor. And so there it is. I mean, the Giants having beaten the Eagles in the playoffs in 81 and 2000, the Eagles winning, and we're talking about seasons, the Eagles winning in 06 and 08. And so the fifth matchup, the rubber matchup here, obviously, it's not like these teams are going anywhere and expiring after this season, but here it is. Obviously, an Eagles team with Super Bowl aspirations, championship aspirations, a Giants team that is trying to remind everyone, hey, we're not just happy to be here. As Darius Slayton said after the game, the Giants have vowed to be a tough out in these playoffs, and they have been so far. So we'll see what comes after this. It was interesting to see the Vikings in their pregame hype video talk about being 4 wins away. I mean, they were trumpeting it to their fans. 4 more wins for our first championship. My gosh, they hadn't even kicked off the first wild card game, and that was in the hype video. Giants aren't thinking like that, and if the Eagles are thinking like that, I doubt it'll be in the hype video before the game.
You know what Darius Slayton says? We're looking forward to the booze and the middle fingers.
and just said it in the most deadpan, shrug it off way. It tells it like it is. And there will be plenty of booze, plenty of middle fingers, and plenty of BOOZE booze, with this being a Saturday night game in Philadelphia, in South Philly. So if you're making the trip, get there early, be safe. Maybe take the train. If maybe I'll see some of you guys on Amtrak on Saturday afternoon, but I'll probably be going down there later than everyone else who is all the fans, I'm sure, would want to get down there nice and early, get ready for what should be a really fun game in a crazy setting. So safe travels to anyone who's making the trip. Enjoy the game, and we'll say it again. Well, first of all, please like, review, subscribe, rate and review, all that good stuff on all your podcasting platforms. But we'll say it again. We'll be back here next week, and what we'll be talking about, we'll see. I think regardless of how this game goes, we'll be talking about either a continuing or a finished successful Giants season, because no doubt that's how this could be framed. But if they're still playing next week, then we could be talking about one of the best stories in the NFL in recent memory. Something more than just a team that had a great run and won a game, and then
it's almost like the team went 9-7, went on to win the Super Bowl. That's never. Oh, wait.
Yeah, exactly right. It's happened before with this Giants franchise, and they're still a little ways away from that. But Saturday night will be a huge challenge, and it'll be fun to watch. And everyone enjoy the game, and we'll be back here with you guys next week. So take care.